Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take complex, high-stakes material and distill the essential knowledge you need to be truly well-informed.
Today, we're wading into a really difficult ethical battleground. It's a space that exists in any hierarchical organization, really.
It's that critical point where the necessity of following orders clashes head-on with moral integrity. It's the paradox of obedience.
Right. We're looking at the concept of the morally courageous follower.
And that's the person whose choice to speak up, or maybe to push back, determines, well, it determines more than just their own career.
It determines the safety and the ethical performance of the entire institution. For anyone in a structured, high-risk environment, understanding this is, it's literally mission critical.
So for our deep dive today, we've pulled together a really powerful stack of sources. Our foundation is the latest guiding document, Army Doctrine Publication 622, which focuses on Army leadership and the profession.
And that's crucial because it tells us what the institution expects from its people, what it says on paper about character and judgment.
Then we're expanding on that with a conceptual article, Moral Courage and Intelligent Disobedience, by Ted Thomas and Ira Chelliff.
This one gives us a framework, a way to understand that higher-order skill set you need to navigate these ethical challenges.
And finally, we're going to analyze a very real and very tragic cautionary tale. It's the monograph, Darker Shades of Blue, a case study of failed leadership by Anthony T. Kern.
Yeah, this case study just illustrates in painful detail the catastrophic failures that happen when leaders lose their moral compass.
And when followers feel like they've lost their voice.
So our mission today is pretty straightforward. We're going to unpack the legal and moral definitions of courage and disobedience.
We'll contrast that intelligent pushback with, just blind compliance.
And then we'll meticulously dissect that Fairchild case study to really understand the organizational costs of failing to enforce basic professional standards.
This isn't just about ethics, is it? It's about institutional safety and readiness. So let's start at the foundation. This is drawn in part from that Army Doctrine Publication 622. When we talk about courage, it's usually split into two types.
Physical and moral.
Right. And in a military context, physical courage is just. It's the baseline. It's the non-negotiable prerequisite.
It absolutely is. Physical courage is fundamentally the ability to overcome that immediate primal fear of bodily harm or even death.
It's the bravery that lets a soldier advance under fire.
Exactly. Despite knowing the incredible danger, military history is just filled with examples of this. The doctrine relies on this for mission accomplishment. If the force breaks and runs,
the mission fails. Simple as that.
But the sources we're looking at today make it so clear that while physical courage is essential for battle, moral courage is something else entirely.
It's characterized as a far rarer commodity.
Yeah, that Robert F. Kennedy quote, it's so instructive here. He called it a rarer commodity than bravery in battle.
That elevates it significantly.
And it's because of the nature of the risk. Moral courage is the willingness to stand firm on your core values, on professional principles.
Even when doing that, puts your professional or social standing on the line.
Right. Thomas and Chelliff called this lonely courage, and that phrase it perfectly captures the emotional burden.
So why lonely? Physical courage, if you display it, you usually get recognition, medals, acclaim.
Yeah, you risk your body and you're rewarded with honor.
But if you stand up against a superior's unethical order, or you just challenge a toxic norm in your unit, what's the risk then?
You risk professional isolation, disapproval, censure, the wrath of your colleagues. You risk being labeled a traitor, a troublemaker.
A boat rocker.
Exactly. And that often results in a stalled career, bad reports, or even getting fired, depending on the organization. You're physically safe, but socially and professionally.
You become an outcast.
So the outcome for you, the individual, is just dramatically different. You might get wounded in combat and be revered as a hero.
But you stand up against an influential peer's unsafe practice, and you could be marginalized by the very system you're trying to protect.
That's the ultimate test of integrity. And that idea links directly back to Army Doctrine Publication 622.
The concept of personal courage.
Right. The doctrine explicitly says personal courage takes two forms, physical and moral. And it enables leaders, and this is crucial, it applies to all Army professionals, not just soldiers, to stand up for what they believe is right.
Regardless of the consequences.
Yes. Leaders who show this moral courage take full responsibility for their decisions, even when those decisions create friction.
So we have this fundamental moral expectation on one hand, the duty to do the right thing. But now we have to layer on top of that the rigid legal framework for obedience that underpins the entire military structure, and they often seem to be in direct opposition.
That's the core paradox, isn't it? The military is founded structurally on instantaneous and unquestioning obedience to lawful orders.
And failing to obey those orders is a serious offense.
It's punishable under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Article 90 for commissioned officers, Article 91 for non-commissioned or warrant officers.
And Article 92 for failing to obey any lawful general order. The consequences they're catastrophic.
Loss of pay, rank, imprisonment. In some wartime scenarios, even capital punishment.
So that structure seems to suggest that blind obedience is what's required, or at least it's heavily incentivized.
It seems that way.
Right.
But the critical tension, the escape hatch, if you will, is that every military professional has a concurrent overriding obligation.
The obligation to disobey orders if the order is illegal.
Exactly. You can be prosecuted for carrying out an illegal order just as easily as you can be for disobeying a lawful one.
And this duality isn't arbitrary. It's a foundational principle.
It is. It's rooted in global historical precedent. From some of humanity's darkest moments, really, the Nuremberg Principle IV, codified after World War II, made this accountability inescapable.
It says that acting under a superior's order doesn't relieve you from responsibility.
Right. If a moral choice was possible, that principle completely dismantled the defense of, I was just following orders, when the order itself was clearly unlawful or criminal.
And sadly, we have plenty of American military examples of the failure to exercise that moral choice.
The most infamous one, the one that always comes up in this debate, is First Lieutenant William Calley at My Lai in 1968.
He claimed he was just following orders when his unit slaughtered hundreds of unarmed, innocent civilians.
He was convicted. The sentence was later reduced, but the key legal principle held. The defense of following orders was not enough because a moral and legal choice was available. The orders were patently criminal.
And the source material really emphasizes that this tension isn't just a thing of the past.
No, it's a modern reality. The sources cite a 2006 case in Iraq. Soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division.
They received an order to kill all military-age males.
So they released 3 Iraqi non-combatants, told them to run, and then shot them in the back.
And the military justice system convicted them.
Again, because that order to intentionally kill non-combatants was unlawful. The source material highlights this critical point. Intelligent disobedience is necessary because failing to use moral courage in these moments, it often results in more severe, lasting damage to your life and career than the risk of actually pushing back.
It's a tragic calculus, but one you have to consider.
You have to understand that legal boundaries. You can't use obedience as an excuse for criminality.
That sets the table perfectly. So we've established the moral obligation and the legal foundation that demands refusing unlawful orders. But if we move beyond just illegal orders, we need to define that higher order skill, that ethical sweet spot that covers orders that might be lawful but are still harmful.
And that is intelligent disobedience.
Right.
As defined by Thomas and Chalif, it's this sophisticated skill of refusing to follow orders that are unlawful or will produce harm. But, and this is key, it does so while operating within the existing legal and professional framework.
So it's a principled resistance. It's aimed at maintaining standards, not outright rebellion.
That's it, exactly. Which requires us to make a critical distinction between this and civil disobedience.
Let's use that common example, Edward Snowden.
Okay, Snowden's actions, regardless of how you feel about them, they fit the mold of civil disobedience. He knowingly broke explicit laws.
Unauthorized communication of classified info, theft of government property.
Because he felt the underlying government action was unjust, and he wanted to bring it to public scrutiny by exposing the system externally. He acted on his own inner conviction, and he accepted the legal consequences.
Intelligent disobedience, on the other hand, is internal.
It's working within the existing legal structure and professional code to resist a harmful order, often with the goal of protecting the superior or the organization or even the mission itself.
So it's trying to correct the system from within, not expose it from the outside by breaking its laws.
Think of it this way. Intelligent disobedience is designed to achieve the commander's higher intent or uphold the organization's values when the immediate order jeopardizes those things.
While civil disobedience assumes the system is broken and needs to be challenged publicly.
Right. But sometimes that pushback, that intelligent disobedience, is precisely what the highest levels of leadership actually demand, especially when the battlefield is fluid.
Absolutely. And we see this dynamic codified in modern military doctrine. General Mark Milley, when he was Chief of Staff of the Army, He asserted this.
He said that in complex, asymmetric warfare, where front lines are a mess and the fight is happening everywhere, soldiers need the capacity to disobey orders when battlefield realities have fundamentally changed.
And there's no time to check back with superiors.
Exactly. And this capability is rooted in the Army's operational doctrine, specifically what's known as mission command.
That's the critical link.
It is. Mission command is the Army's approach to command and control that empowers subordinate decision-making. It's about decentralized execution.
And it relies on two pillars: disciplined initiative and commander's intent.
And disciplined initiative is the core concept here. It gives subordinates the freedom of action to adapt quickly as long as they stay aligned with the leader's broader intent for the mission.
So in that specific scenario, comms are down, the situation has changed drastically. Leaders actually expect this kind of disobedience.
They do. If the plan no longer fits the situation, the subordinate is empowered and, in fact, doctrinally obligated to deviate from the written order to accomplish the overall purpose.
In those cases, maybe you don't need as much moral courage because the system anticipates and rewards that flexibility.
It's true. But intelligent disobedience goes a step further than just disciplined initiative. It also addresses violations of values, asking tough questions to clarify orders, and resisting those internal pressures to do wrong.
Which brings us to the organizational environment itself. Because you can have the right doctrine in place, but the culture of a unit can still be the biggest barrier.
Because in day-to-day life, the orders aren't about killing non-combatants, they're about fudging numbers or cutting corners.
And this is where we bring in that concept from Lord John Fletcher Moulton: obedience to the unenforceable.
It's that vast domain of human action where there's no specific law telling you what to do, but where moral duty and responsibility exist.
He argued that true organizational greatness is measured by the extent to which people can be trusted to act ethically without being forced to by law.
It's the space between what you're legally allowed to do and what you're legally forced to do. It's the realm of professional standards.
But if that culture starts to slip and it starts prioritizing short-term results over ethical methods, the ends over the means.
That obedience to the unenforceable just dissolves. The sources call this a corporate cultural ethical relativism.
And when the pressure to perform is intense, the environment can become, well, toxic, corrupting.
And the source material identifies 4 key ways that moral standards get rationalized away at work. We should probably detail these because they're the internal mechanisms that crush moral courage.
Okay, the first one is relabeling. Taking improper behavior and calling it good because it seems to achieve a goal.
It's the ultimate confirmation bias. In a military context, you could relabel cheating on a safety inspection as resourcefulness because the unit needs to deploy, and stopping to fix the problem would cause a delay.
So the bad act gets rebranded as a noble act of commitment.
Exactly. The second rationalization is distancing. I'm just doing my job, or I'm just following procedure. The bureaucratic shield.
This is a huge one in large organizations.
Yeah.
It lets the individual feel morally detached because they're just a small cog in a big machine.
Right. They feel they aren't responsible for the consequences because they didn't set the policy. They just executed their little part of the task.
And the third is using euphemisms to sanitize unethical actions.
This is incredibly common in the corporate world. A superior doesn't say lie on the financial reports. They say use creative accounting or optimize quarterly earnings.
It sounds professional, but everyone knows it means cutting ethical corners.
We saw this in the Wells Fargo and Volkswagen scandals that are cited in the sources. Wells Fargo employees, under huge pressure, created millions of fake accounts.
The order wasn't commit fraud. It was deepen customer relationships or maximize cross-selling.
The euphemisms masked the fraudulent activity. And Volkswagen put software in their cars to cheat on emissions tests, a defeat device.
The pressure came from leaders who knew they couldn't meet clean air standards and get the performance they wanted. So the euphemism might have been aggressive engineering solutions.
Right. And the fourth rationalization is dehumanizing the victims of the harmful acts. It makes them seem less human, less deserving of ethical treatment.
This is most obvious in combat, where you strip the enemy of humanity, but it applies elsewhere too.
Think of layoffs. Executives call it headcount reductions or optimizing human resources. It strips the reality of job loss and economic fear from the cold decision-making process.
So in both Wells Fargo and Volkswagen, thousands of employees followed wrong orders because of this poisonous culture.
A complete lack of intelligent disobedience and moral courage. They were just obeying orders and conforming. And this reinforces the central point. Cultures that focus only on short-term gain will damage long-term success.
And leadership starts at the top. Leaders who stress results over method will breed dishonesty.
And it takes that individual moral courage to stand up and be a voice of reason, even if it means risking professional penalty.
That structural failure, the lack of courage from the top, and the lack of intelligent disobedience from the bottom, is exactly what led to the tragedy in Anthony T. Kern's monograph, Darker Shades of Blue.
This takes us from the theory straight into the real-world cost of these failures. The case study focuses on the events leading up to the 1994 crash of a B-52 at Fairchild Air Force Base.
And the central figure here is the Lieutenant Colonel Holland. His position was absolutely critical.
He was a B-52 standardization pilot and, critically, the chief of standards and evaluations. The irony is just devastating.
So he was the institutional expert on flying.
Yet he had a clear, repeated, documented pattern of poor airmanship that spanned 3 years. He was the standard bearer who deliberately violated the standards.
And among the junior crew members, his reputation was already well known.
Oh, yeah. He was famous for frequent, willful violation of technical orders and regulations. The case study shows how the institution saw blatant warning signs again and again, but consistently failed to act.
Essentially granting him acquired impunity.
And that erosion of integrity started with things that seem trivial, but are symbolically powerful. For example, Holland routinely parked his car in the red-curbed no parking zone right next to the wing headquarters.
The sources say a captain once questioned this, and the response from a superior was just chillingly dismissive.
That's Bud's car. He always parks there. I don't know, he just does.
And that single moment sends a catastrophic message down the chain.
It says the rules apply to everyone else, but not to the expert, not to the chief of standards. Standards are flexible based on who you are.
And once that standard is compromised on a trivial level, it escalates.
It rapidly escalated into public safety violations. In July 1991, Holland did a flyover where he grossly exceeded the B-52's bank and pitch limits. He stressed the airframe beyond its safe operating parameters.
And senior commanders saw this with their own eyes, from the ground.
The deputy commander for operations, the DO, even said at the time, "We can't have that. We can't tolerate things like that." He recognized the immediate danger and the corrosive effect on the flying culture.
So they saw the danger, the violation, the cultural risk. What was the disciplinary action?
Almost nothing. A verbal reprimand, crucially non-documented. To Holland and everyone else, it was a slap on the wrist. It signaled that the standards were indeed flexible for him.
The lack of documentation is the critical institutional failure there, right? No historical record for future leaders.
Precisely. And this acquired impunity just allowed the violations to become more and more flagrant. We see it in air shows in 92 and 93.
In 92, his exhibition included low-altitude steep turns, a high-pitched climb estimated at over 60 degrees nose high.
All maneuvers that exceeded the technical guidance and lacked the required command approval. The same mistake as 91, but more aggressive.
And the leadership failed in the same way again.
Yes. The wing commander just assumed the waivers were approved. The incoming DO verbally reprimanded Holland, but again, failed to document the counseling.
This is where that intelligent disobedience needs to happen at the command level. You have to recognize that protecting an expert at the cost of the standard is destroying the institution.
And that failure to document had the exact destructive effect on junior followers that the commanders predicted back in 91. The bad example was officially emulated.
Right. In 1993, a Captain Nolan Elliott tried to copy Holland's dangerous pitch-up maneuver during an air show.
It was a near disaster. And the consequence. Elliott received corrective training and administrative action. He was punished.
So the junior officer who copied the dangerous violations set by the senior leader gets punished.
While the senior officer who set the dangerous example and violated regulations repeatedly was protected by these undocumented reprimands.
I have to ask, isn't there an argument that they were just protecting institutional expertise? Holland was the chief of standards. Maybe they were afraid of losing a critical asset.
That is the insidious rationalization. It's relabeling bad behavior as good because it serves a perceived organizational need. But it's so destructive. The monograph calls Holland's ability to break rules with impunity insidious.
It created a hypocritical climate.
Exactly. The rules only applied to those without influence. By punishing the follower who copied the act while protecting the one who started it, they just confirmed how toxic their standards had become.
The crisis finally came to a head in March of '94, during a mission to the Yakima bombing range. This is the turning point.
because it forced the followers themselves to show the moral courage their leaders lacked.
That day, Holland flew the B-52 well below the 500-foot minimum altitude.
One pass was as low as 30 feet above the ground. The crew members were terrified. When they got back, they immediately confronted what happened. Captain Jones, one of the crew, vowed he and the crew would never fly with Holland again.
And Jones's statement is so powerful. He said that if he had to, he would be willing to fall on my sword to make sure it didn't happen again.
That phrase, "fall on my sword," that is a profound act of intelligent disobedience. It requires immense moral courage.
He understood that reporting a senior influential officer meant risking his own career.
But the risk of not acting meant risking his life and the lives of his crew on the next flight. His integrity outweighed his self-preservation.
So the subordinates performed admirably. Captain Jones reported it up the chain. And we see another act of courageous leadership from Lieutenant Colonel McGeehan, the bomb squadron commander.
Yes, McGeehan restricted his own crews from flying with Holland unless he, McGeehan, was also on the aircraft. That was proactive risk management. He used his authority to protect his people, putting his own career on the line.
But once that information reached the top, the superior leaders,
The catastrophic failure of moral courage repeated itself, but this time with just a shocking display of willful ignorance.
the deputy commander for operations, refused to even look at the videotaped evidence of the Yakima violation.
He famously said, "I don't want to know anything about that video. I don't care."
That refusal to engage, to willfully ignore clear evidence, it's not just poor judgment. It's a profound failure of professional duty.
It creates a protective wall around the misbehavior. By refusing to document, he ensured Holland's record stayed clean. He broke the trust of the subordinate leaders, McGeehan and Jones, who put their careers on the line, only to see their superior refuse to even look at the evidence.
The unspoken message was, we prioritize avoiding friction over safety.
And the subsequent disciplinary action was, once again, an unrecorded verbal reprimand. Holland remained in his key position as Chief of Standards and Evaluations.
The senior leadership's acquiescence to his brand of airmanship just destroyed institutional integrity.
And the cost of this persistent failure was paid on June 24, 1994, when Holland's B-52 crashed during an airshow practice.
That crash killed the entire four-man crew, including the morally courageous Lieutenant Colonel McGeehan, who was flying with Holland.
The man who put his career on the line to protect his crews ultimately lost his life because the system failed to remove the reckless pilot. The irony is just heartbreaking.
It's the ultimate confirmation of the cost of leadership in action. The people who upheld the standard were betrayed by the leaders who should have enforced it.
And that Fairchild case study gives us this devastating lens to analyze the requirements in Army Doctrine Publications 622, Army Leadership and the Profession.
So let's systematically apply that doctrinal context to understand the scope of the leadership failure, not just the technical one.
We can start with counterproductive leadership. ADP 622 defines this as behaviors that violate core competencies or Army values, leaving the organization worse off and undermining readiness.
Holland's behavior was clearly abusive and erratic, abusive toward regulations, and erratic by ignoring the very standards he was supposed to uphold.
And the senior staff above him exhibited leadership incompetence, which the doctrine defines as ineffective leadership from willful neglect or lack of awareness.
Refusing to view the videotape, failing to investigate the pattern, repeatedly failing to document. That's willful neglect and poor judgment. They chose ignorance.
Yeah, the monograph quotes a pilot who summed it up perfectly. He said Holland was treated like a crazy ant that the parents tell you to ignore. The hypocrisy was amazing.
And that tolerance of abusive and erratic behavior just compromised the entire ethical climate.
A core leader competency in the doctrine is to create a positive environment where honesty and critique are encouraged. By failing to act, senior leaders broke that trust.
They basically told their subordinates, if you rock the boat, we will not support you.
And the failure to enforce standards had a cascading negative effect on morale and cohesion, just like the doctrine predicts. When leaders allow a disconnect between their words safety first and their deeds protect the expert, they breed cynicism.
Let's get specific on the attributes from ADP 622 that were lacking, starting with character.
Character is the moral and ethical qualities of an individual. This should have been the first line of defense.
And the crucial failure here is integrity, doing what is right legally and morally.
The senior leadership failed by tolerating known, repeated, willful violations and not documenting it. It made the standards meaningless. And Holland's failure to follow orders showed his own profound lack of integrity.
And they also failed the test of personal courage.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The junior crew members and McGeehan displayed it in spades, but the senior commanders failed to show the moral courage to confront an influential peer.
They took the easier path, the non-documented, non-confrontational path.
Over the harder, correct path of decisive disciplinary action, they prioritized avoiding friction over preserving lives.
And moving to the intellect attributes, the failure of sound judgment is just stark.
Intellect enables leaders to think critically and make sound judgments, to anticipate the second and third order effects of their decisions.
And the decision to keep Holland in that high visibility role, despite overwhelming evidence of dangerous behavior, was a profound failure of sound judgment and risk assessment.
They failed to assess the risk of his behavior being copied, which happened with Captain Elliot. They failed to anticipate the ultimate tragic outcome.
They actively polluted the talent pool by keeping him there.
And finally, we have to talk about stewardship of the profession. What does ADP 622 mandate here?
Stewardship is the responsibility to strengthen the Army profession and ensure its readiness for the future. It's about caring for the people and resources you're entrusted with.
So retaining a rogue aviator as the chief of standards, the ultimate role model position, after multiple flagrant safety violations.
It was a fundamental strategic failure of stewardship. The sources are clear. If people in key positions can't maintain the standard, they must be removed.
By not removing Holland, the leadership signaled that expertise, even dangerous expertise, mattered more than character, integrity, or the safety of their people.
They left the organization worse than they found it. They handed the next generation a poisoned culture where standards were relative and life was expendable.
The ultimate cost was immeasurable: a loss of trust, a collapse of the ethical climate, and ultimately, 4 lives.
We've taken a deep dive into the very fabric of military professionalism today, and the critical lesson seems to be that the courageous follower is just as essential as the ethical leader.
Moral courage is required across the spectrum. The leader has to enforce standards impartially, and the follower has to be willing to speak truth to power.
Even when the system seems designed to crush dissent.
Right. We saw in the current monograph that when a culture rewards results regardless of method and senior leaders fear confrontation.
The cost is measured in institutional trust and, tragically, in human lives.
It comes back to that powerful statement from General Patton: moral courage is the most valuable and usually the most absent characteristic in men. Our sources show that this absence is what creates the conditions for catastrophic failure.
The Army Doctrine gives every professional the tools, the attributes, the competencies to build an environment where moral courage can thrive.
But the system only works if individuals are willing to accept the personal risk that comes with speaking up.
You, as a professional, you're responsible for what your team does or fails to do. When you see a discrepancy between the values on the wall, integrity, personal courage, duty, and the actual actions you see,
that is your moment of moral choice. It might not be a criminal order, it might just be a parking spot, a doctored report, or a corner cut on maintenance.
the question you have to ask yourself is this. When you're faced with the fear of becoming that isolated figure, the one displaying the lonely courage needed to intervene, how will you ensure your personal integrity and professional duty overcome that fear?
What standards are you willing to fight for, even if it means risking your standing and your comfort?
We hope this deep dive into doctrine, intelligent disobedience, and the tragic consequences of failed followership gives you the clarity and conviction you need to navigate that difficult space. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.